Fora TV. The world is thinking.
Good evening. This is a Long Now Foundation event. My name is Stuart Brand. Thank you for overflowing this wonderful theater. I should mention that later this month we have another speaker, Craig Venter, who may also draw a large audience, especially because he's creating life these days. And in a sense, this is a second in a series of talks about thinking about the future. Only the speaker tonight says it's not the future that he talks about, but I'll bet that many of us interpret it that way. The last speaker was Paul Sappho, who is here tonight. Paul talked about techniques of forecasting, especially in technology, and sort of in the decade range of time. In a sense, he's looking at the future in a micro scale, in context of the Long Now Foundation, where we like to think of the last 10,000 years and the next 10,000 years. Decades are pretty quick. But in that period of time, large events have a way of happening. And so the speaker tonight is talking about the macro scale and macro events. Please welcome Nassim Taleb.
So my talk is not definitely going to be about the future. I know nothing about the future. First of all, let me show you the picture of the book. The American Statistical Association has a special session on the Black Swan, and that's what they're going to do with my book in August in Colorado. I have to show up to be yelled at. The Black Swan. What is the Black Swan? First of all, it's not this wine. And let me explain to you that people, as part of our inability to think, to do second-order thinking, most people buy me this wine not thinking that other people are aware of the Black Swan wine and the fact that I write Black Swan. So please, if I ever invite you to dinner or something, please for Christmas, I just had an email today from students at Harvard. They want to piss off the professors by inviting me, of course. And they said we're going to have a reception, and they mentioned this wine, okay? So it's undrinkable. It's really undrinkable. All right. So what's the Black Swan? No, honestly, particularly the red wine. What's the Black Swan? Before the discovery of Australia, we had no reasons to believe that swans could be of any other color but white, or people in the old world. And effectively, there was an expression in medieval England. You'd sooner see a black swan than, say, for example, it was like saying when pigs fly, or when I don't know, when George Bush does something intelligent or something. There was immediately exception. So there was an expression until we saw Australia, and effectively the sighting of a single bird destroyed millennia of confirmation. So it was posed as a logical problem by showing that there's no reason, you cannot rule out a black swan because you haven't seen any. Okay, so my problem is not a logical question. My black swan is an event. It's not a bird. And it's an event that has three properties. The first property, it is hard to predict. Very difficult to predict based on information. Am I standing in the right spot? Okay. Based on information before its occurrence, prior information, based on historical information. You have here a sample of black swans. The most interesting one is the tie. Someone's going to forecast the future. We have to forecast that human beings, 2,000 years away, would constrict their blood supply with this device, for example, okay, and attend meetings, okay? So that's very difficult to predict. The computer was a black swan. It changed the world, and nobody thought the computer could do anything. You know, it was initially used for combinatorics. I mean, the Watson from IBM did not think that this tool could have any use. The rise of religions, black swans, totally unpredictable. Harry Potter is a black swan. A lot of cultural phenomena are black swans. To me, the most significant black swan, and the one I'm going to focus next, for a few minutes, is the First War. The First War we had after Napoleon, we thought for about 100 years that the world became civilized, and that, you know, people became conscious of the need for peace. And you had this devastating war, the biggest war, something that destroyed, and of course it came in 2 volumes. You had volume 1 and then you had a sequel. So here we have black swans, events of low predictability, high consequence. But the most vicious part is the following one, is that before the fact, they're extremely predictable, but after the fact, you know what? We saw them coming. So we have, this is what I call the retrospective distortion, is these events are prospectively unpredictable, retrospectively predictable. Why? We even have disciplines to give us the illusion of understanding the world, you see. We have disciplines that make us misunderstand the world by giving us this illusion of predictability. History, for example, economics, other such things. Astrology, okay. So we have, and what's the mechanism by which we sort of like have this illusion of understanding the world? The first one is what I call silent evidence. Before, people think that the First War was predictable, particularly if you, I don't know if you have been to school, high school, and they discussed the First War. It appears to result from tension between the UK on one hand, Austria and Germany on the other, okay? So you think that there's tension that led to war. If you see tension, then you can predict war. But you're not looking at episodes of tension that did not lead to war. And there were a lot of episodes of tension before that did not lead to war. And these episodes usually led to parties in Baden-Baden, you see, with opera singers, a lot of champagne, and they get drunk, right? Kings get drunk. Plus, they know each other, so they know how to do it. So you have to realize that after the war, you think tension causes war, but if you're in a champagne business, you think tension causes, drunkenness by kings when they make up, okay? So we have that problem. So let me give you an illustration of this inability we have in looking at what I call the silent evidence, a pool of evidence that did not lead to the same result. The comment made, this is recorded, no? Even better. By a comment made by a publisher about the success of the Black Swan. And he was explaining it as follows. Look, it has an animal and a color on the cover. That explains the success. Now, okay, so I went on, when I heard that, I said, okay, plain, I'm going to take care of this guy. I looked on Amazon for how many books have animals and colors in their title and on the cover that ended up flopping, okay? And you had plenty of them. I found 69 books with a Black Swan in their titles, okay? That were flops. If you don't hear about them, it's because they're flops. We're not looking at evidence. Plus, of course, you have permutation. Pink, elephant, different colors, different animals, okay? So plenty of books like that flopped. So this is what I call the cemetery of evidence. And for those of you interested in probability, it's a big probability problem because we compute probability based on those who survived, probabilities of survival, not based on the pool of those who started. This is very endemic in the way we analyze the world, the way we understand information, the way we perceive information. Decision-making under uncertainty is completely dominated, okay, with this mistake of taking a pool of information and excluding the rest. So it's what I call silent evidence. Well, you have it on Wall Street. You look at the winners and say they have skills. You don't look at people who have the same sets of skills who ended up losing, because these people don't write biographies. You see, they don't say how I lost $1 million. They tell you how they made $1 million. So you have that. So, and then, but the problem is historians. You know, people on Wall Street, you can understand that they're not that smart, but historians did not know that, okay, or did not deal with it empirically. Now, I happen to have spent 18 years as a trader, and I hated it, okay? But I stayed there because it was fun, particularly because you had economists around and people who make forecasts and could make fun of them. So there was there was some advantages to it. But one thing I discovered is that when you work with, and the beauty, the power of economics is that we have plenty of data. When you have data, you can do some real analysis on the data that's completely unbiased, because the data is going to be there, and you can throw numbers at the computer. So I looked at history to see if anybody did something like that, and I discovered that one of your future speakers, Neil Ferguson, a brilliant man, and I recommend if you ever want to have fun lunch with someone, to call him up, if you know, he's good lunch, right? So he is, and he wrote a paper showing that although we believe that the first war was predictable, the bond market, there's something called war bonds in the UK, and the UK bond did not predict it. So it cannot be that predictable if the bond market, nobody told, you know, the bond market. Okay, so we have prediction markets and stuff like that. So we realize now when you run, if you dig into history, how bad we are at predicting, how bad we are at seeing things, how bad our predecessors were at predicting. But a mechanism, of course, is called overcausation. I skipped this because it's too complicated. But there's another, there's some psychological mechanisms involved, that you make an actual prediction, you have the outcome, and then, but this is PowerPoint, all right. This is remembered predictions, okay, upside down. What you remember, typically, that you remember, what you remember having predicted is more consistent with what you observed. So you don't remember what you actually predicted, but you revise your memory of what you actually predicted continuously to make it consistent with current events. Not only you do that with your prediction, but you also do that with your intentions, which is a big problem for us in adjusting, because you would realize that if we didn't have this effect, people would know that they're very bad at predicting. The economics departments would be empty, or you would commit suicide or something like that. You would have no social science to speak of, okay? People would turn cab drivers or something. So you would realize, but there is, it is a psychological bias. Now let me talk about the Black Swan problem in history, okay, in philosophy. And I'm going somewhere with this, particularly with my next work. The first gentleman up there on the left, the one who's a little horizontally challenged, his name is Hume, okay? It's called Hume's problem, but it's not his problem. It's because he wrote in English. It's a great idea to write in English, then it can be remembered by people who write in English that it's a Hume's problem. Effectively, he took it from someone else. But Hume is worthy discussing because he was completely annoyed with the Black Swan problem. Completely annoyed with that problem of induction. It was not called Black Swan at the time. It was called the problem of generalizing from finite sample, or problem of induction. And what he did with it is very simple. He said, you know what, I leave it for the philosophical cabinet. And in real life, I can't deal with it. He was a party animal, and his reaction to the Black Swan problem is to become even more horizontal, you see, which he gained a lot of weight, and then he died, and he had a happy life in Edinburgh, in Paris and Edinburgh, okay? So let's forget about Hume, because he could be of no help, except also to illustrate one thing that happened in philosophy is that increasingly philosophers became what I call domain dependent. Is they're good at talking about a problem in a classroom, and then they forget about it when they leave the classroom. And it's a bias. Statisticians, for example, don't understand statistics in real life. They're good in front of the blackboard. We know that from a lot of experiments. The way I discuss it in the Black Swan is I talk about that domain of dependence, about the Reebok Club in New York, where people go get in their gym clothes and then take the elevator to the Stairmasters, and then get on the Stairmasters and log their 112 stories, and then stop and then take a log of it. Okay, so you have domain dependence, people not recognizing something in the texture of real life. So let's forget about this guy. Next to him, there's a French guy, but the French don't know about him, or at least forgot about him, wanted to forget about him. He is a bishop called Huet, and he dealt with the Black Swan problem by becoming extremely religious. He not liking science, and of course we had the Enlightenment that became pro-science, and with all the tragedies that we have coming from it. And so he is forgotten. He became very religious. The gentleman here is Al-Ghazal. He was the Arabic language. The Arabs call him an Arab. The Persians call him a Persian. So he's an Arabic language philosopher who attacked the classical philosophers by writing a treatise called on the Incoherence of Philosophy, a very famous treatise, and he created Sufi Islam out of his thing. So the Black Swan problem led these two gentlemen to become extremely religious. Now, the one on the right is my hero, or, I think we don't really know if he existed, or if, but what he represents would make him my hero, is Sextus Empiricus. He's not in philosophy books, not very common philosophy books. He had two things. He was a skeptical gentleman who phrased the problem induction just the way Hume later on repeated it, 2nd century AD. And his second attribute, he was a doctor. So there was a school of medicine, of decision makers under uncertainty, called the empirical doctors, who were damn good doctors. They did not like theories, did not like to generalize, did not like to extend into unobservables, okay? Did not like to go from what they know to what they don't know. Extremely careful. They call themselves empiricists. They did not like to generalize. And these people were extremely successful. Unfortunately, they were completely, when medicine became intellectual rationalists, that we thought we understand the human body. So these people were out of business for about 15 centuries before medicine came back via the barbers. Okay, their ideas came. And if you guys are alive today, it's because these guys, or their ideas, or because barbers, not because of intellectual doctors, the contribution of intellectual doctors. Finally, there's a gentleman, I'm sure you recognize him, particularly if you live in Berkeley, all right? So this is Karl Marx. All right, so Karl Marx had this idea of he wanted, in his thesis on Feuerbach, he said that philosophy, was just talk, let's do something with it, unfortunately. But so his idea was to turn knowledge into action. So my idea is the exact opposite, how to turn lack of knowledge and lack of understanding into action. So this is pretty much my talk. And how not to be a turkey. In the Black Swan, this is my cousin who did this story of the turkey. In the Black Swan, you have the turkey is, in my book, The Black Swan, turkey is fed for 1,000 days. Every single day confirms to the turkey that butcher is extremely, or the human race in general, is extremely interested in its welfare, increasingly, until, of course, when the Black Swan happens. I'm interested in the story of the turkey, one, because it shows the Black Swan story, and the consequences of inferring from observables. But the other one is that for the turkey, it's a Black Swan. But for the butcher, it's not a Black Swan. Okay? So Black Swan depends on the set of knowledge you have. Now, if we're going to have an earthquake here, you have to make contingencies, all right? If there's going to be an earthquake, the following slide will probably take care of, what I have to say, all right? So make sure that you listen to the next slide, because it summarizes my position on the Black Swan. There are two provinces, Mediocristan and Extremistan. And by the way, I thank Chris Anderson for suggesting the name Extremistan. I gave him the manuscript. I had a nerdy name, right? And he suggested something else, and it was Extremistan. I owe it to him, all right? And so In Mediocristan, the following properties hold. Let's play this following thought experiment. Say we gather 1,000 people randomly from the planet, okay? And you bring them here, you put them on a scale. Put them all on a scale. Of course, well-built, made in California scale, extremely well-built, okay? And make sure you have one Frenchman, but not more, okay, because you have people standing next to him, all right? So on a scale, and so you have them, okay, and you weigh them, all right? Then try to imagine the heaviest human being you can think of who can still be called a human being, and add him or her to the scale. You have 1,000 people. How much of the total will he represent? How much? 0.3%, 0.5%, 0.3%. I don't know, in California, but typically, it's 0.3%. The heaviest human being on the planet would be nothing, but that's from the total. So in Mediocristan, the following rule holds. When your sample is large, exceptions can happen, but they're not going to be consequential to the total. So this is a domain I call Mediocristan. That domain, everything you've learned in statistics, or almost everything you've learned in statistics, applies to Mediocristan. And it's called the law of what? Large numbers. Okay. That as your sample becomes large, you're not standing the but also it tells you can diversify your portfolio. It tells you why insurance companies somewhat survive, although they don't quite survive that well. Okay? It tells you a lot of things about, okay, but without this supreme law of Mediocristan, you would not have statistics. Now, this is a problem because let's take the very same sample of 1,000 people, and you're going to have people from Rwanda in your sample, the very same sample, and try to think of the heaviest person you can think of, who can still be called of the wealthiest person you can think of, who can still be called a person. He is not far from here, I guess, no? All right. He can still be called a person, but borderline, no? Okay. And add them to the sample. How much of the total will he represent? Okay, it'd be 100%. Okay. He worth, what, $60 billion? The remaining 2,000 would be worth $2 million? All right. You have people from Biafra in there. Okay. So the supreme law of Extremistan tells you the following. Whenever you take a large sample, a small number of observations in that domain will represent a big share of the total. So you have two domains, one that's dominated by the exception, Extremistan, and one that's dominated by the general, by the mediocre, by the central, by a lot of people. The collective dominates the other one, okay? Very simple. Let's compare income. Dentists, for example. You will not find a dentist who makes more money than all the other dentists combined. But in the book business, what's her name? The lady, she sells a lot of books, right? Okay. So effectively, you have what? You have 16,000 books published every year in the English language. Of these 16,000 books, some years, 5 to 25 books, represent half the sales. So you have concentration in Extremistan. And we're moving from Mediocristan to Extremistan. If you're paid by the hour, you're in Mediocristan. Extremistan is, you guys are the epicenter of Extremistan. Okay, you have Google, you have stuff like that. It wouldn't have happened with someone who sells sandwiches cannot become a Google overnight. Okay, you cannot, if you have demand, sell sandwiches and then you have demand for 2 billion sandwiches. I don't know what you're going to have to do to deliver 2 billion sandwiches. But in the electronic and information age, you can deliver, put a zero on it, okay? So you have different properties in Extremistan. Fairness, social fairness, of course, is more prevalent in Mediocristan than Extremistan. Of course, you have more opportunities in Extremistan, or the illusion of opportunities in Extremistan, but you have a lot of unfairness because you have a winner-take-all effect in Extremistan. And the story I use in the Black Swan is that of Giacomo, an Italian opera singer, and they don't have a Pavarotti yet. Pavarotti is minus 75 years old. Okay, you don't have a way to store your voice. The income of opera singers, okay, is not going to be massively skewed, because if you find yourself in a little town and you're okay, right? So the guy from Milan isn't going to compete with you, and then they discovered all these technologies, right, that destroyed Giacomo and helped Pavarotti. Okay, so for example, as a writer, I'm an extremistan because every time one of you buys my book, I don't have to go to my hotel room and write it again, right? But if I were making sandwiches, I'd have to do that. So the properties of extremistan are quite nasty in the sense that one observation can destroy the whole thing. One exception can destroy the whole thing. Economic life is from extremistan. The metrics we have are not adapted to extremistan. So take the companies in the US. You have, 12,000 listed companies. Between 100 and 200 companies represent half the capitalization. There's this rule of 80-20, Pareto's law, 80-20. It's not 80-20. Things in life are about 0.05, 99.95. So this is an illustration of extremistan versus mediocristan. The inequalities. This is on the left is mediocristan, on the right is extremistan, super extremistan. Here in the middle is on its way to super extremistan. You don't have that with height. So there are two kinds of randomness. This is two kinds of randomness, and they're not. I mean, this is about the different. Even in California, I can have someone say walk in here 8 feet tall. You guys won't be surprised. I would be surprised, but I can't see someone walking in here 2 billion feet tall. But with wealth, with random variables that belong to extreme, so they're not the same animals. Okay, so when someone says this is an approximation, when there's something called the Gaussian curve. Okay, it's a tool of mediocristan, and there are other most statistical names that you know belong to mediocristan. When they say their approximation, they're as much of an approximation as this plant approximates a human. Okay, there are large qualitative differences. Now let me turn on philosophers. I get pissed off whenever I hear the word uncertainty principle, as if it has anything to do with uncertainty, for a lot of reasons. Number one, quantum mechanics is from mediocristan. That's the first one. And the second one, the uncertainty we have in physics, and that kind of uncertainty in quantum mechanics, is the least uncertain of all uncertainties because they average out. You see, which is the reason why the stable has been here all this time. Okay, I've been talking for 20 minutes and the stable did not move. So the problem, to me, uncertainty, when I hear someone is, I was trying to go to Lebanon and there was war, and there's absolutely no scheduled timetable for the end of the war, okay? There was, when they killed Bhutto, it was not scheduled, all right? The subprime crisis. So the uncertainty we have is micro uncertainty. It's so monstrous, and people waste their time talking about limits of knowledge here when the limits of knowledge are not consequential. The limits on the right are consequential, yet they don't think that these on the rights have real limits. That's why I get very angry. Another thing, I coined a word called the ludic fallacy, to try to beg people not to equate uncertainty with what you see in games as a casino. Number one, because casinos from mediocristan, and the second one, you don't know the real life. You don't know the probabilities in real life. You don't know. In the casino, the sterilized probabilities. Most of what we learn, particularly in philosophy probability, comes from this stupid thing. So I called it ludic because instead of gambler, because I learned that once you use a Latin or Greek word for anything, you could charge a lot more for it. You learn from that. So use ludic. There's another reason, okay, because gambler's fallacy is something else that belongs to a Berkeley, former Berkeley professor, Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman did, but anyway, that's the reason. But let me give you my Polish joke. So I've written 2 non-technical books, and almost every other line, I go on a rant against what I call, the ludic fallacy or manifestation of known probabilities. Till I received by mail a copy of the Polish translation of my book. And there's a passage in it where I say it has nothing to do with games, how I get angry when illustrators suggest a die to put die on my look, what was it? All right, so that's my Polish joke. That's how it looks like. All right. So my idea in the Black Swan is not like Hume to say, okay, let me get horizontal, all right, and forget about, leave my anxiety about the problem of addiction. My idea in the Black Swan is to try to get, not to be the turkey in real life, try to get out of trouble. So I think the mediocre stand, extremist stand is a good start. You worry about the Black Swan and extremist stand because it's consequential. So already know how to worry about the consequential. And people keep telling me, oh, you Taleb, you worry too much, you cross the street. I tell them, yes, my idea is, unlike you, I don't want to cross the street blindfolded. Because it looks like we have a psychological problem. We tend to be chicken when we know about the risks and overreact. And most risk-taking in society, and this you can see through experiments, are taken not because we're particularly courageous and have a lot of bravado but know the odds. No, it's because we don't know the odds. Or we don't know what's going on, we don't know who's taking these risks. Think of bankers. Okay, they're the most incompetent, probably, profession in history because they've been kept up by the governments. But the bankers, all right, they take a lot of risks. They think they're not taking risks. If they knew the risks they're taking, they would change. They would become plumbers or something else, you see. So they don't have the temperament. So it's not, so a lot of people take risks because they're blindfolded, not because they are conscious or they see what they're doing. This is classical in finance. Is that you see frequently the Dear Investors letter when someone does well for about, and then every single metric in economics will give them low-risk profile for 12 years. Right? And sure enough, at the end, they have that, that letter. It's usually a very standard letter. Dear investor, surely these events as much of a surprise to us as they are to you. And then, okay, but I saw a letter sent by some folks in 1998 who had a pseudo-Nobel in economics. And I saw the one sent recently with subprime. There was no linguistic evolution. The same thing, right? Dear investor. So this is what I've been fighting. This is a typical illustration of the problem of adduction I want to try to avoid. This is what you see in finance or in anything where you're going to have, this is a performance. It's going to be dominated, variation are dominated by, this is 20 years, by a small number of observations. Always have that. Yet people chit-chat about small variations all the time. I was talking to Ferguson, and I got in my head that maybe I should start thinking about history. So I went to the bookstores to fill up with books of history, historiography. We're thinking about doing some way of dealing with randomness and history by comparing Mediocristan to Extremistan. And if you were to do a quantitative history, like simplify history to a simple stochastic process, that would be quantitative. On top, you would have a Mediocristan type history. At the bottom, you have an Extremistan type history, where you don't have a lot of moves, but guess what? When you have a move, it's going to be abrupt. So most of the time, nothing happens, and then you have big jumps. History jumps. It doesn't crawl. And that was a statement I made in the Black Swan. And against everything that was known in historiography, la longue durée, all that stuff. Next, let me talk about the experts. This is going to be in a subway in London, okay? Ignore experts, okay? Some experts, not other experts. Not all experts, all right? And we're going to see, not the plumber, all right? Plus you need the plumber, okay? Let me start with the mathematicians, all right? I don't know, I'm sure there are plenty of mathematicians here, enough, so a few would be insulted. That's probably what I would like to do, okay? So I spent some time working with mathematicians of randomness. And of course, I made the following discovery one day when a gentleman was giving a lecture of why mathematics were important in society. And he was explaining how traffic lights were optimized and so on, and so forth. Mathematics is great. And I thought about it, what if we wrote an anti-history of mathematics? Number one, of where mathematics has not been useful to society, extremely destructive. And the second one, instances in which society did not need mathematics. So mathematics plays a very small role. But owing to self-serving biases, they tell you what they do for you. So don't tell you what they don't do for you. It's like politicians. So we have the feeling that they're important. Of all the space of possible equations that we have, the one mathematicians can handle is minute. So what they do is they want something they can prove. The number of things we can prove or use theorems for is so small that mathematics is very, whatever can be mathematized will be suspicious. Now, we were spoiled in physics. They tell you, look, it works in physics. We were spoiled in physics. Although, there's a lot of things in physics that has not been mathematized. But how about medicine? How about economics? How about all these other fields? Okay, they give you, this is called the confirmation bias. Like politicians, they do tell you what they did for you, not what they didn't do for you. Confirmation is trouble for a lot of reasons. First, let me show you this slide. This is, do you see it well? Yeah, a bunch of nuns, okay? And I think they know, the mathematicians know about uncertainty. The knowledge of uncertainty resemble the knowledge of these ladies about nightlife and fun and partying, how do you party? Right? Honestly, right? So this, and having spent 9 years working with mathematicians, till finally I gave up and teaching, trying to create anxiety in math PhD students. And the problem is that it's very mechanistic. Now, so there is a big conflict between probability, where you're dealing with non-observables, and mathematics, that requires mechanistic mind that looks for certainties. And most of the mathematics we have for randomness is going to be then focused on the Ludic fallacy, on Mediocristan, things that can be easily mathematized. And that's a tragedy. It is a tragedy because it is a tragedy because you have this big wedge between practice and this perception of reality, okay, coming from mathematics. The other problem we have, okay, I'll make it clear in the next few slides, is that we tend to tunnel when we project the future. So you'd like to tunnel, so you like to use someone's tools to tunnel further because otherwise you have anxiety. So when you project the future, you project something extremely narrow that resembles the projection of the present, even less crazy than the present, okay? And of course you don't realize, we're not crazy enough to imagine the future. I mean, events that take place, if I discussed these black swans and here, 20 years before they happened, I'm sure that someone would have called an ambulance and would have taken me away because these scenarios were crazy. Reality delivers much crazier scenario than our mind can imagine. So there's a tunneling helped by mechanistic tools. But why do we do that? Why do we produce these measures of uncertainty? Why do we like to produce these measures of uncertainty? Well, we have a genetic, or we have whatever we have that we need to reduce our anxiety by using metrics. There's nothing wrong with talking about uncertainty. There's something wrong about talking about uncertainty to satisfy. Take Novocaine or take some, or have a drink. Okay, it's better than produce a forecast if you want to lower your anxiety. And we'll see later when I talk about the expert, breaking down the expert line. When I was on Wall Street, the fun was to look at projections made by economists. You see, lawyers are very smart. You can't catch them because they're slick and they always manage to give you some vague answer about anything. Economists, they give you a forecast. Well, you go process it. If you have a computer, you have coffee, and you have a trainee, you can process the forecast to see if they work better than cab drivers, and they don't work better than cab drivers. And there is the psychological explanation is the forecast got worse since they invented this, called the spreadsheet. In the past, you had to sweat to make a forecast. Now, you can just extend the cell. You you extend the cell. So you go to year 2020, 2040, you go as many centuries as you want. It doesn't cost you much. In the past, it was labor. So this is framing, okay, typically. And once you see it on a piece of paper, start believing in it. It's what we call framing. A person who really caught these people with their pants down is Philip Tetlock, who's supposed to be here tonight. And Phil Tetlock did process all these, and of course, we did the psychology of it. When I met Phil, I just realized that, hey, you know what? We know all the psychological biases. But I then realized that there was a very simple way to figure out which domains we can forecast and which domains resist forecasting. And guess what? It's mediocre stand versus extremist stand. Domains that have the property, the randomness, is the mediocre stand property. We are good at forecasting. When we deal with stars and so on, our errors are Gaussian. Okay, and this is what I discovered about the first application is measurement errors in astronomy, right? So, but when we're talking about anything social, anything where one single observation can have massive consequences, we're not good at forecasting. So, mediocre stand, extremist stand. There is a tableau made by a gentleman called Chanteau, right, where it looks like the know what versus know how distinction works. Like a soufflé chef, you know that he's an expert. But an economist, I'm not sure. Or as an expert definitely at dressing and looking like an expert, but not expert at delivering a service that they claim to that's what I call the faux expert or pseudo-expert. So now why do we listen to these people? Well, the first one is, there's an old, as you know, I'm sure you all know it, don't ask this gentleman, all right? Ernie, all right? Don't ask a barber if you need a haircut, okay? So if you can't ask someone in his profession, so there's a self-serving aspect of professions. And the second one is we tend to like empty suits, which allowed me, to formulate the following rule. Never take advice from someone wearing suit and tie. It works. It lines up perfectly to the mediocre stand, extremist stand distinction. It works, okay? It lines up to the faux expert. Now, there's a lesson. This is Robert Trivers figured out something, and it was very interesting. That was before the invasion of Iraq. That if you have any plans to make war, to engage in war, you don't know what's going to happen. We're not good at predicting wars, because we didn't have many wars in our genetic heritage. We did a lot of raids and pillaging. We're good at it, we humans. And he showed how primates are very good at invading territory, killing all the males, and all these kinds of things. So it looks like simple domains. Again, the errors are from mediocre stand. We're good at forecasting. Complex domain, we don't understand. We don't have the right intuitions. The link between action and consequence is not as visible. Errors can be monstrous and dominated by extremes. So again, wars are since Napoleon, wars have been more and more from extremist stand. For example, if you want to invade Grenada again, go ahead, no problem, right? Okay, if you want to invade China, you're going to have problems, all right? So you see the difference between simple and more complex domain. And, of course, we're going to take some advice from Yogi Berra, who said the future ain't what it used to be. Okay? Big philosopher of randomness. He understood the point about how we're gliding more and more into some form of concentrated disorder. One of the things I discuss in my next book, I studied religion a little bit. I don't believe in beliefs, by the way. All right? I don't believe that we humans use beliefs to act. I think beliefs have some other purpose. But the problem that I find very inconsistent, and I don't know if some of Dawkins' friends or these guys are here, I find extremely inconsistent to be suspicious of the bishops. Okay? Here, this is an Orthodox service, because I'm Orthodox. So, be suspicious of the bishop, and be a sucker when it comes to the stock market, okay? Or listen to the economists. I don't understand what metrics, double standard you're using, okay? When, Dawkins was saying that these people have double standards. He's talking about postmodernists. He said, anybody riding a plane to go to a conference, okay, when they doubt the laws of physics, is a hypocrite. To me, anybody invested in the stock market who is critical, okay, of religion is a hypocrite. Okay? You either, I mean, that's my point. There's nothing wrong about being critical of religion, but you've got to go all the way. So what happens is our skepticism is domain dependent. And we're going to test it. There's a very easy metric for me to test skepticism. It took me a while to figure it out. You show things to see if people see false patterns or not. And we're going to be testing. I have a little lab in London, at London Business School with Dan Goldstein. And we're going to test to see if religious people are more fooled by randomness outside religion, and vice versa. Okay, so it is a problem. Substituting religion with CNBC stock and some, you know that the stock market analysts, okay, they're worse than nothing, a lot worse than nothing. Okay, so there is an inconsistency there. And incidentally, I figured out one thing is that medicine. You know that medicine for a long time we had an expert problem in medicine. You still have some expert problem in medicine. Medicine killed more people than it saved, particularly in the late 18th century. Late 19th century, okay, till discovery of penicillin, okay. And why? Because of something I call the illusion of control. And if by going to a doctor, you wanted to do something, going to a doctor to do something, you hurt yourself. So going to the temple of Apollo or something like that, or any form of religion, so long as it takes you away from a doctor, is going to be beneficial for you, all right? So that's the idea of religion. People don't, I have a notion of religion that sort of conflict with the rest. To illustrate what I mean by illusion of control is when you go to a casino and you see people wanting to get a high number on a die, they throw it hard, okay? And they want a low number, they throw it soft, okay? And this is, this is a Council of Economic Advisors with His Eminence there, and they're all there. So, and this is an exercise of illusion of control, okay? All right. So now we're out of the fun section. How many more minutes do I have? Sorry. And let me get technical here. Sorry. 10 minutes? Okay. All right. So now let me get into the boring section, right? This may cause a lawsuit, I hope. The gentleman here, I'm debating him tomorrow. Very nice gentleman, incidentally. I'm not attacking him, I'm attacking a statement. Let me talk about probability for a while. So it's going to get more technical. It's called boring section. If you want, you can leave and come back for the drinks, all right? So this gentleman made the following statement. He said, these events that we saw last summer should happen every 10,000 years. Actually, we had 3 days in a row, events that happen every 10,000 years. If you look at the gentleman, you see that he's considerably younger than 10,000 years. So therefore, where is he getting his probabilities from? Okay, not from personal experience. He definitely is getting his probabilities from where? He's getting them from a theory, all right? So where do you theory from something in philosophy, we would call that a priori. There is an a priori. It doesn't come from any form of empirical observation or anything. And I don't know if 10,000 years ago we were trading, we don't have the records of what they were doing then, and if they were trading, how sophisticated they were, what computers they used. So we have a problem with claims made about small probabilities, because the smaller the probability, the less observable it is going to be, the more you're going to rely on theory, and theory is going to be fragile. But let me add something to that problem. And that problem, I call it the telescope problem, okay? What matters is not the probability. What matters is the event. So if I have a small probability of losing $1 million, okay, I don't care about the probability, I care how much I lose, all right? So what matters is if you worry more if you have a small probability of being on a plane that crashes than if you have a small probability of not having an umbrella under the rain, okay? So it's not the probability that you care about, it's the probability times the event, the magnitude of the event. It's the pair, probability times pi times lambda. The problem we witness here is that the smaller the probability, the more confident they seem to be about that pair pi lambda, when in fact it's the most unstable. Because the smaller the probability, the more error you're going to have, the higher the error you're going to have in the estimation of that probability. You see? Necessarily, if you have smaller number of observations, you're going to have a larger error. So therefore, anybody talking about small probability doesn't know what he's talking about, literally. Okay? Or they're not talking about probability, they're talking about something else. I don't know, religion, or whatever it is, okay? They're not talking about probability, all right? So this is a problem, even, that we have, because that pair, the higher, that triangle, I call it pi lambda, becomes a lot more random. I mean, to repeat the point, a 1,000-year flood, okay, required a lot more than 1,000 years observation, okay? But a 1,000-year flood is much more devastating than a 100-year flood, you see? So this is a problem. We have a probability. If, I don't know, the Federal Reserve, if you pay him a visit, let him know, okay? Which brings me to prediction markets. Very quickly, I'm going to go over the boring section here. People use some idiotic statement that we're good at predicting number of collectively better than individually, that we know since Galton, number of beings in a jar, okay? They infer that we can predict sociopolitical events. First statement, you can see the difference. These are from Mediocristan. Your errors are not going to be monstrous, okay? The number of jelly beans here. The second one is that when you predict probabilities, it's much easier than predict total contribution of the impact. You see? If you have a small probability of having Bill Gates or super Bill Gates, it makes a big difference. Prediction markets, we may be able to predict prediction markets because it's a binary event. There's no consequence. It's just yes or no. You see? So whether it's extremistan or non-extremistan, it may be okay. But even then, you cannot rely on the probability. Using these prediction markets as probability, look at today. Today, Hillary Clinton is, she was like, what? She had 70% probability of, she was trading at 70%, now she's trading at 50%. So these probabilities change all the time. How can you rely on them as indicators? It's like people think that probabilities are like the temperature. We go have someone from MIT and 2 Russians come in and we're going to measure it and get the number, okay? It's like temperature. It's not like temperature. We don't measure it, okay? We estimate it, and even collectively we're not better at it. And there are things that even collectively we'll never be able to get because the properties are way too complicated. This is the problem I have with using prediction markets. We can use prediction markets to predict how many car crashes you're going to have on a highway, maybe. Not for something more complicated than that. Second point I have with models versus practice is the story, that metaphor of the ice cube that I discussed in the Black Swan. I just realized, I tried to read the Black Swan because I was bored, and I didn't like it, but I found that section needed some expansion, right? So, because I realized, hey, you know what, it's a good idea to discuss. The problem of most theorists, the problem of universities, is you go from theory to practice. The degrees of freedom from theory to practice are considerably narrow, small. The reverse is monstrous. So let me give you this metaphor. If I leave a small piece of ice cube on the floor, okay, you can easily get someone in second-year physics students to write the equation to tell you how to predict how that ice cube will melt, okay? It's a very simple thing. A second-rate student could do it, all right? Someone from Boston, that is, can do it. Okay, so so you can predict. So, but now conditional on seeing water on the floor. Is it easy to reverse engineer the ice cube? No, you have an infinity of ice cubes, different shapes that would have generated. This is exactly going from theory to practice versus practice to theory. Given something you observe, the observable. A generative observable and would be a theory. You have an infinite number of theories that can do that, particularly when we are dealing with nonlinearities, particularly when it is nonlinear. Okay, in a nonlinear world, let me give you this metaphor: this solution of problem induction, the most intelligent piece of work done on the problem induction since Sextus Empiricus. If I have these series of dots up there, I ask you to extend them in the future. okay? With a linear model, this is step one, okay? You can extend them from 20 years into 80 years. If it's linear, you just take a ruler and extend it in the future. You agree? Now, you're assuming it's a linear model. But it turns out to be nonlinear. How do you know from that part of the sample, okay? So a linear series of points can generate something nonlinear. Or it could be what we have in the fourth graph. So the statement is as follows. There's one and one line that could connect series of dots, so you have uniqueness. This is why people like linear models. But when you go into a nonlinear model, whatever you see can be explained by an infinite number of nonlinear theories or nonlinear equations. It's infinite. So you realize the explosion of degrees of freedom, which is to say that, okay, we have in the nonlinear world, I'm sure someone's going to ask me about basins of attraction, chaos theory, and stuff like that, and I'll talk about it. I'm definitely certain from experience that someone's going to ask me about them in this session. So this is why I don't extend. I don't deal with the future. The other problem is with power laws. Okay? You only can look at them qualitatively. What we call fractal self-similarity. Extremistan, as you can say, has one structure, which is a fractal self-similarity, the one that was similar to the geometry of Mandelbrot. The problem is that reverse engineering the parameters, guess what? They're all over the map. It's almost impossible you can just deal with it qualitatively, but qualitatively we can do very well. So let me conclude here with my what to do or what not to do. I was in Athens about 2 months ago, and I spoke for about an hour. And the person told me, yeah, we've told us, now what should we do? I had a acute state, I entered a state of rage, That was not, really, I told him, I've been talking for an hour, I've been telling you what not to do, and you don't count it, the guy was a consultant, and you don't count it as advice. Negative advice, to me, is vastly more important than positive advice. But people don't think it is important. Just like if you go to the bookstore, you can only learn from people's mistakes. You don't have how I failed in life. These people, a cemetery of evidence, don't publish their books, okay? See, how I made $1 million, 10 million, these can be accidents, but there's regularities. You see the 10 Commandments, okay, except for a couple, I think, they're negative advice. And look, they stuck, okay? Even almost the adultery part. I mean, it did work. So negative advice tends to work, okay, compared to positive advice, okay? So I tell you what not to do, all right? What not to do is not to rely to use forecasts in a very qualitative way, not to use them for anxiety relief. I told you what not to do throughout. So only a charlatan would go in and say 10 points. I'm trying to resist it because I do not want to be a business strategy type charlatan with 10 steps to success and how to become a millionaire, all right? So this is why I hate it. And people tell me, like I was in Washington and someone said, well, I got a forecast. My job is to forecast, okay, in economic life. I looked at her, I told her, well, the only thing I can tell you is I can strongly recommend you get another job, all right? I cannot go in and solve people's problems. I'm not a dentist, you give me your teeth and I tell you what the problem is. I have general worldview that is, and to fit my worldview, I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptical empiricist. I cannot, okay, tell people what to do, all right? I can tell people you have to extend tails. So here, I'm in Silicon Valley. I can tell you very easily, don't read Harvard Business School papers, typically because I find common mistakes among all of them. They take like the biotech, all right, industry, and they say, well, you know what, only one company makes money. If you take out Amgen or the other, and Genentech, they don't make money. But of course, if you take out the lottery winner, the lottery is, So, okay. The other technique is, in the Black Swan domain, conventional metrics of looking at a pool of results as indicative of future results is inherently flawed without extending. Like biotech, of course, is not going to work, okay, in small samples, okay, because the small sample, the past does not have a cure for baldness, for example. And I know a few here who would definitely make the company rich, okay, if there's a cure for baldness, all right? I'm not the only one. No, there's some, I see some shining things in the crowd. So so extending into what you don't know, okay? So some industries like biotech, venture capital, stuff like that, you extend the right tail. In other words, if a black swan happens, it can only benefit them. insurance company, if a Black Swan happens, it can only hurt him. So it's a very simple rule of thumb of not trusting returns for banks, okay, and underestimating returns for venture capital firms, stuff like that, small rules of thumb. Also, of course, not take advice from someone wearing a tie and stuff like that, okay? And I'm sure people will ask me for more, so I'll leave it for the Q&A. Another thing I did discover in the Black Swan is that if we have small probabilities that have dominated our planet, okay, therefore there got to be survival advantages to those who have long memory. Sure enough, there's a paper showing why, you know that elephants are matrimonial, the ladies dominate, and then old ladies are kept around. Guess why? Because they remember droughts. They remember what happened in 1906, all right, and where they had to go to find water, okay? So remember rare events, okay? So there is, and societies have used that for a long time, okay? Senate, for example, senatus, you know, it means an old person, okay? That's why they have a council of elders. Have some, you know, this is why I try to look older than my age with my gray beard, all right? Have a council of elders, but even in Arabic, the term sheikh means an old person, all right? So there is a value in society for keeping around people who are not productive simply as advisors on rare events. If that happens, where to go, okay? So this is locally. There is something what I call knowledge without a cause, okay? These people have a lot of knowledge, they don't have theories. In economics, we have the exact opposite. For example, we have crises like the subprime happened. We had the same one 18 years ago. Or a little less, okay, in 1990, 18 years ago. Wow, time flies. We had the same one, but nobody remembers it because they simplify it to models. So they don't store, they store the theories instead of storing the facts, which is what I call erudite empiricism, as opposed to, without inductive generalization, just store the facts. And theories destroy that. And finally, this, okay, leads to, I was talking about them, precautionary principle. No, it's not precautionary, super precautionary principles. Is giving some respect to the oldest member, okay, of the planet itself, okay. There's some rules. Don't mess with complex systems because we don't understand them. We don't see a link between, we don't understand, I mean, what's going on. And the planet is smarter than us. That's the topic of my next book, is how we're a lot better at doing than knowing. Okay? The difference between explicit and implicit knowledge. And we're better at heuristics than theorizing. Theories, we do that for entertainment, I think. And then we give ourselves the illusion. Like universities, if you look at the track record, they're a lot better at PR, telling you what they discovered, than at really doing things. It's sort of like you take birds, you lecture them how to fly, and then they fly, and you explain, you know, the miracles of aerodynamics, okay? So so we have, I mean, of course they contribute, but not, we are a lot better at doing. Why? Because of evolution. And this is, okay, this is the works of evolution, right? What we have on this planet. The result of things that have been longer than us. And it knows a lot more than we do. When I go back to the medical empiricists, these people were hyper-skeptical. But get what? One thing they did is they respected tradition and age. And age-old practices, even if they didn't make sense to them. In other words, you had to have, the default is to go with what was done, rather than you needed to override the default. Likewise, it leads me to hyper-conservative, approach to ecology. You don't have to explain why you don't want to pollute. You don't want to explain, come up with some theories, particularly if the theories can be fragile to someone like me who can go in and show how you can, show errors in all these forecasting models to justify not polluting, okay? Thank you very much. I think I'm done. I said a lot of things, crammed them in 50 slides, and thanks. So I stay here?
Can we get the house lights up a little bit so the speaker can see the audience and we can see each other? Say a little more about the sequence of events in your trilogy. The first book, the book that you mostly talked about tonight, and the next book.
Yeah, no, the first book is not an interesting book. It's called Fooled by Randomness, but I wrote it, like half, when I was half trading, half, when I wanted to kill time, and it was not very deep. So I managed, I managed to rewrite the same book with the Black Swan. Nobody realized. No, a publisher said, "Oh, it's the same book," and I explained to them that people go to church every Sunday to listen to the same story. All right, so so I rewrote it in a more intelligent way with the second one, and now I'm rewriting the whole thing a third time, completely differently. As I said, focusing on I'm taking empiricism to the limit. Knowledge without a cause. I don't believe in knowledge, and I'm discovering things. After the Black Swan, I met a lot of people who gave me evidence that things like in the clinical trials, you think that that's what the person was looking for. In fact, no, they retrofit their story and stuff like that. So my next book is going to be a little more drastic.
Drastic how?
Because I'm going to make more enemies. Now I already have only economists as enemies. The rest, this is a crowd that's not very hostile. Tomorrow, the crowd is going to be very hostile. Anybody in finance typically they have this, Phil Tetlock observed, he says there's a huge cognitive, how do you call it, cognitive dissonance, listening to me, because either I'm right and what they're doing is wrong, or I got to be a nut, right, or something like that. So they of course, they go for the second option. So, but at the same time, they don't feel comfortable. They say, "Well, I have no argument against it." So, so the next time, I think anybody in academia, or a lot of people in academia, will have this, animosity towards me, which would be more fun. Yeah.
What enemies of the current work surprised you?
Enemies of what? Sorry?
Of the current work. Who was scandalized by this book that surprised you?
Well, economists, because I explain. Number one is I use arguments, very simple arguments against the science of economics by explaining that they're dangerous to society and stuff like that, and that their forecasting, we rely on it, and I say, okay, if you go to church, it's a lot better than listen to them. They got angry. And also there's other things I did with Mandelbrot. We went into a full-pronged attack on the economics establishment by showing that their statistics are off, and we went after the Nobel. And now we're going hunting down the Nobel Committee. Okay, so these people are not very happy when we call them charlatans. But explain to me what makes them different from astrologists. Empirically, they're the same, but they're also far more elegant, right? So that was, when we used these arguments, they got very angry. Let me tell you, the funny story is, I was in Paris at École Polytechnique, where I was speaking, and I stood up, and at some point I got emotional, all right? And they were all there, all mathematicians almost, and I stood up and said, using these techniques, typically the bell curve to measure risks, is not even silly. It's immoral, I said, sort of shouting, right? There's a gentleman who's from the French, stood up, I'm a member of French Academy of Science, and so on. It was a scandal, so I had to stop. That was my best episode.
All right. All right, a bunch of quick questions here. Maybe we get quick answers. First one's from Sequoia Hacks. Where is Sequoia Hacks? Is that a real name? Probably not. What's going on at the threshold between extremist Stan and mediocre Stan?
Okay. That's an interesting question. A lot of people have dealt with extremist Stan, mediocre Stan somewhat in statistical physics, where people talk about critical point. Per Bach spoke about criticality that generates power laws. That's not my point. My point is very simple, that pi lambda representation causes me to assume extremist Stan as an extension of unobservables. So it is epistemological. In the end, I'm nothing but a philosopher, okay? And I'm a skeptical philosopher. I cannot make a statement about transition points. The other statement I would like to make is a statement about dynamics versus statics. People are very good at trying to explain things using dynamics because you get tenure by showing a complicated mathematical paper. There have been a lot of papers on the dynamics that generate extremist Stan. Starting with Yuli, about bacterial population, something called preferential attachment by Zipf and Simon, right? By a lot of papers showing, showing rich get richer, big gets bigger, Matthew effects, the poor gets poorer because he gives his money to the rich, okay? Now, all these models are very simple, okay, but they don't explain the world because the Google guys, right, came out of nowhere, and the big guys tend to die, okay? So they can't explain why the S&P 500 today, only 75 companies survived the last 40 years. Okay, if big gets bigger, we should have one big company on Earth. Okay, so what you have to do to improve these models is start adding a twist that makes company go bust when they get very big. And come back to my nonlinearity. Now you have an infinity of models and much smaller set from which to calibrate, and it's going to be difficult.
Here's an internet question from Mike. Will the internet and internet connectedness in general bring us more toward winner-take-all extremistan, or, with its empowerment of the amateur, more toward mediocristan?
We're unfortunately going towards winner-take-all extremistan more and more. I'm sorry to say that. This is life, but it's a very destructive extremistan. When I looked at what the internet has created, is at the same time that it created a winner-take-all effect, it created a pool of future winners coming to destabilize the top. And that's the long tail of my friend Chris, who got me invited here,
Actually, no. Philip Tetlock got you invited.
Phil Tetlock, okay, thanks. The idea of having a pool of people destabilizes, so the dynamics are even more complicated. So you have an extremistan, it's not the same winner every time. Now, look at it. Look how short was the road from 0 to Alta Vista back to 0. Okay? And now it was from 0, from college dorm to Google, back to, no, sorry.
Sell.
So you understand what I mean by the stable, unstable. It's extremistan, more and more unstable.
Do you ever buy stock?
No.
I thought so.
I mean, I buy, okay, let me tell you the idea. Portfolio for someone who doesn't understand anything about the world. The statement I can make is have the maximum amount of zero risk securities and small amount and maximum risk securities. So I have a medium risk portfolio, but I'm not making any claim, okay, as to my tail beyond, say, my loss. So I have 7% invested. That's all I can lose, all right? So I'm not making a statement on future. You know, and let me tell you one thing in finance. When they say they can measure tail events, can measure tail events, when they say a risk can measure, past risks don't predict future risks. That's the first thing that shocked me. Past risks do not predict future risks. So you don't know. I mean, this is all verbiage about stock market measures of risk.
Speaking of stock markets, we had a question here from Oliver. How do you explain Warren Buffett's record?
Oh, this is come back to my picture of the problem of survivorship bias, or the problem of the cemetery. Okay, I have my watch, even if it's a broken clock, can be right twice a day. All right, so if you have a lot of investors, it's a necessity to have a Warren Buffett simply out of luck. Now, I don't mean he is lucky. I'm saying I'd like to withhold judgment. The only two people I think who are not lucky, there's no luck. No, I'm not saying he's necessarily lucky. I say I don't know. Because randomness, you have so many people trading, you necessarily will produce someone like that. The only two people are Soros, but don't tell him, all right? And then there is the other gentleman from Renaissance, okay? Simon, he's not lucky. He's beyond, he is definitely, but what he does, he's not a speculator. He's just like some Walmart stock, taking liquidity from one market to the other. There's no exposure to uncertainty in his models.
So, from Max, the question is, what does extremistan say about the power of the individual to influence events?
Unfortunately, it says two things, just like the same thing as a butterfly. You know the story of the butterfly. A butterfly in India flapping its wings. That's a metaphor for chaos theory, okay? Can generate a snowstorm in Tahoe, okay? But how many butterflies are there in India, right? How many things like butterfly in India or snails in Guatemala, right? So you have a lot of small things, okay? So I don't know. The problem that you have is at the individual level, it's a winner-take-all effect. So you have to realize that they have a huge decoupling between skills. Skills are necessary. I'm not saying they're not necessary. They're necessary, but can lead you nowhere. In Extremistan, dentists, any medium-skilled dentist, okay, any dentist can survive, okay. But I know from writing, you have 1 million manuscripts of novels floating around, okay. I'm sure there are marvels in there. It's Extremistan, only if you will be published. That's it.
Well, that may be a little different with the internet question because the eyeball issue. The books get looked at by not very bright editors.
Yeah, you're not right, you're right about that.
And stuff in blogs and online, and Kevin Kelly's, instead of publishing a book, is doing all this stuff basically as a sequence of blog items. And Chris Anderson did his book, The Long Tail, pretty much online before he did it as a book.
I see.
So there you're getting a much larger, it's more than a sample. You're getting a lot of human intelligence focused on something you're interested in, making a book which is both good and popular. Is that a different world?
I think for nonfiction, in the world of ideas, in our world, you probably, the online reduce the randomness of, if you're smart. This is how I did my first book, Fooled by Random. Nobody wanted to publish it. Nobody, all right? Because I have fictional characters in my book, okay? And then, and I have rejection letters. If you want, I can, show you. It's a lot of fun to read them, okay? I have to explain to you why they're not published, why it's going to be a flop, all right? And Fooled by Random sold hundreds of thousands of copies. So I left it on the web, and someone picked it up from the web. So you're right, but it was sort of like an idea book. Idea books, ideas, they find their way. But novels or nonfiction is not the same. You have the consciousness, our consciousness cannot harbor too many works of art. It's limited. That's what creates the power laws. It's too limited. Our consciousness is too narrow and getting narrower. This is why you have Harry Potter. Okay, I showed the English, and now everything's moving to the English language, California, something to do with California. So everything's concentrating, you see, in our knowledge of languages are dying by the minute, and because of Extremistan, English is winner take all. They took everything, and it's easier to communicate, in the same language.
And yet you're a polyglot and are comfortable in 10 languages or so.
I'm not comfortable in 10 languages. I barely
6.
speak English today. No, whatever. It's not that languages don't. I mean, you read them. You don't use them. But the idea of first of all, languages survive by luck. Okay, English is probably the worst possible language. Okay, to have as a world language, and it's becoming. Not English, bad English. It's become the world language. Citibank English, you want to call it. The spreading, okay, because of a piece of luck, and then start spreading. That's it. This is why we don't have Esperanto or Serbo-Croatian as a world language. It's just a piece of luck.
As they say, the language of science. Heavily accented English.
Russian English. Yeah, this is the...
the perspective you bring has a feeling to me of coming from enough different angles that your comfort in a number of different languages. Is that some part of your own mental heuristic that you can think more strangely than most?
No, I'm just interested in languages because, for example, I was reading the text, okay, when you see translations, they don't mean the same thing. Like, for example, very simple translation. I'm interested in religion now, and if you know a little bit of Greek, you just realize that the credo doesn't mean I believe in God. Credo pisteo. Pisteo means I trust, which is a completely different statement. So there's no statement of belief. Belief is something very extremely modern, and now was translated into belief. So knowing languages sometimes allow you to see nuances in words. Particularly Arabic is definitely a potent point, because a lot of the medieval texts come from or went via Arabic or translated via Arabic, and you have a lot of mistranslation of things.
Mm-hmm. What's your interest in religion?
My interest in I have an interest in belief.
In belief.
All right, belief. Because I think belief plays a role. Mm-hmm. Okay, belief is for entertainment. I think that at the end, I was trying to explain to myself in the shower what was it that I wanted to do next, and I tried to just realize that we're not that different from primates when you go to the zoo, except for our brain, and it didn't go very far. So I mean, you see it in daily life and stuff. So that's sort of my point. So so this is why I have this interest in belief. Is still skin deep. The other problem in religion is that I think that the mind does not like the vacuum, to quote someone else, but our mind doesn't, I forgot, does not like a vacuum. So religion has worked, I'm conservative, has worked for a long time to fill that vacuum, and works a lot better than science, or modern science.
So you're suggesting that one way of finessing a lot of the illusions of rationality you've been talking about is basically belief?
No, my point about, I'm not, I don't recommend religion.
Tradition?
I am saying, sorry?
Tradition, would that do?
I'm saying that if you remove religion from people's brains, they get into something vastly worse. Nationalism killed a lot more people, or economics, something even, stuff like, so you got problems. So this is or social science, or psychoanalysis, you see. So you might as well keep them to religion. And it comes back to a statement made that was the esoteric, the problem of Averroes, which was taken by Spinoza later. Averroes said, what was he trying to do with religion? Okay, he said it's very simple. If you explain Aristotle to the common person, he or she won't get it. So we got to tell him what to do. Therefore, religion plays a role. That was Averroes, okay, the biggest thinker of medieval Islam, okay. And later on, it was taken by Spinoza. It was exoteric, by saying the Bible is there for a purpose, because it's a good story for people who don't have the intellect to understand what I understand. Spinoza. That was his statement, okay, in different terms, of course. So the idea of religion for the masses, all right, the opiate of the masses, all right. I remember when I said the stock market is the opiate for the middle class. I'd rather give them back their opiate, all right. I don't need it, but I'd rather give them that opiate than give them some other, opiate that's vastly more dangerous. That was my. But if you can do without this, it's okay. If you can, right? Odds are people can't.
Raises the question how you can be a skeptic without being a cynic. Do they go together?
I mean, people call me iconoclastic, but I have a huge devotion to some people like Mandelbrot or some other people. So I have different icons. But cynic, I don't know. I mean, there's some people I despise, and you say it. I'm compromising. It's easier to explain. I'm compromising. You say the things the way they are, without mincing words, and you stick to it. So you get some heat. It's okay. All right, you keep sticking to it. Particularly that I was lucky not to have been an academic from the start. Because when you're an academic from the start, you're socialized, so you're afraid of offending this guy. I have no allegiance. Look, I have no allegiance. So, offend, that's okay. I give, and then if I feel guilty, I give money to charity. Then I'm okay. All right.
Question from Nicole Boyer. How does focus on black swans affect quality of decision making? Does it increase paralysis or inaction?
That's exactly the opposite. It makes you take a lot more risk in some domains. I take a lot more risk in some domains. If you're aware of Black Swan, focus your risk-taking on some things, not others. It makes you take a lot more risk in tinkering, trial and error, and a lot less risk when you rely on someone's opinion who can be a full expert. So it makes me take a lot more risk in a lot of domains. I take a lot of risks. I'm not afraid of risks that some other people are, and vice versa. Okay. I'm afraid of the stock market, but I don't understand it. I don't think anybody else does, by the way, based on track record. So I don't take that risk, but there are other risks I take.
Okay, Kevin Kelly, who handles the questions, handed me one by himself. Gene therapy is a drastic unknown technology, for an example. We have millions of years of experience with breeding, in a sense, and maybe 8,000 years of serious breeding, and zero experience with engineering life. So Craig Venter, who will be here in a couple of weeks, should we not dare engineer life? Should we do this, but don't dare predict it, to see what happens? C, predict about possibilities, but don't believe what our predictions say. Or D, go ahead and predict.
Okay, is there going to be dinner? No, I can't. The problem I have is I cannot, there's so little I know, I only talk about things I know.
If you knew, should we do something in that?
I know I have no idea, but no, I think, I mean, I'm a skeptic and a highly paranoid skeptic, all right, with things I don't understand. But I don't want to, make a statement on the subject, but I'm not familiar with the whole background.
Okay.
I don't know, but if you want to talk about invasions, I'd be ready to talk, but not this.
All right, let's go to one you know, Neil Ferguson. Peter Schwartz here has a question. Neil Ferguson with his counterfactual histories, uses multiple interpretations of history, is allowing for invisible evidence to develop an alternative scenario. Is that a way of dealing with black swans?
Yes, definitely. He and I are I mean, do the same thing. If you have the same, you know, he the first person to understand my book. He was the first person to write about my book and say, this guy, I felt understood after reading him. So he understands counterfactual history, alternative scenarios. You can't take the visible, you have to take invisible. What could have happened? Let's not stick to the observed. But whenever you have non-observables, that outcome wouldn't have happened, to have richer view of history. So this I agree. My view of counterfactual makes us even more, makes the interpretation of historical events even more fragile to error, okay, so it's hard to be a historian. But I think I agree from that standpoint, this, the counterfactual, yes, the introduction of counterfactual.
Probably most of this audience is going to vote tomorrow. We're having this election from the primaries. What's, looking statistically at voting, what's your sense of what that's all about?
I haven't read the papers.
Not in terms of outcome, just the event itself. What is voting?
I don't know. There's so little I know, all right? But what I know definitely, I'm comfortable with. I don't know nothing about, I mean, I'm not, it's like, a lot of people ask me about things, I know no clue, and just in one of, I think in the Black Swan, I say, learn, have the guts to say, I don't know, right? This, I know nothing. I definitely will not vote for Hillary, if you want my hint. But I'll do that. So this is my...
So let's see, who's that leave? John McCain?
Sorry?
McCain?
No, I'm not, definitely, I know I'm not voting for, but I don't know the rest.
Romney, no.
No, I'm definitely not making a statement, political statement here. You're not going to catch me. You can try all you want.
Just out of curiosity.
I need a lot more, I need real drinks, you know, no.
The ballot is secret, but how many here are voting for Romney? Wow. Okay, good, a couple. How many for McCain? Okay. How many for Barack Obama?
Oh, there you go.
Not surprised. How many for Hillary Clinton? About half as many.
Okay, so you see,
Would you have predicted that?
No.
Who? Ron Paul, right.
Ron Paul.
Right in? Oh, is he still in it?
No, definitely I'm not voting for Ron Paul. That's,
How many can't vote?
How many here can't vote? That's interesting. Wow. Okay, thank you, Ryan. That's a good question. That's a lot of people. I'm sorry.
this is... So
lean on the person next to you and
so
see
that
if you can
tells me
change
the proportion of mathematicians here, foreign mathematicians in the crowd. So,
This was wonderful, Nassim. Thank you so
very
much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me.